Welcome to the e-learning series on electric vehicle charging infrastructure or EVCI. These modules have been developed by MP Ensystems Advisory Pvt Limited with CESL and Electric Mobility Initiative as our knowledge partners. This is the first module in the e-learning series which covers Indian and international experience in setting up EVCI.
Greetings from MP Ensystems. We are a niche sustainability consulting and advisory firm. We work in several sectors, including power sector, transportation, built environment, and our motivation is to promote decarbonization of all of these sectors while making sure that the livelihood enhancement is kept intact. Through this series of modules related to the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, we bring to you some kind of a methodical process to create a deeper understanding of where should we really have the charging infrastructure set up, at what locations, and there are three parameters that we are using to do so. One is the grid interactivity, second one is the convenience of the users, and the third part is about revenue maximization through this entire process. So welcome, I hope you all enjoy this series of modules. Thank you so much.
In this module, we will cover EVCI policies, stakeholders, and business models in India. We then look at the international experience in establishing an EVCI network and propose learnings for India. On completing this module, you should have a basic understanding of the current status of EVCI in India. Let's start with an overview of Indian EVCI policies, stakeholders, and business models. This chart is a timeline of major EV policies in India along with sales of EVs in the country. The announcement of faster adoption and manufacturing of EVs or FAME in 2016 coincided with a boom in EV sales. The first major document on EVCI is in 2017, the Charging Infrastructure for EVs, Guidelines and Standards, issued by the Ministry of Power. This document allows setting up public charging stations as a delicensed activity and states the standards for fast, moderate, and slow chargers. In terms of location for EVCI, the document recommends siting them at intervals of 25 kilometers on highways and in a 3x3 kilometer grid in cities. It also proposes that oil marketing companies should set up charging stations. Beyond this, the document does not recommend how cities and states should select locations for EVCI to ensure convenience to users, balancing the grid, and revenue to charging station operators. In January 2022, the Ministry of Power released revised guidelines for EV charging infrastructure, which contain some important additions, including EV owners can charge their vehicles at their residence or office using existing electricity connections and at existing domestic tariff. The tariff for electricity to public charging stations will not exceed the average cost of supply until the year 2025. And government land for public charging stations will be made available on a revenue sharing basis, with charge operators paying Rupee 1 per kilowatt hour to the landowner. More than 15 states in India have issued electric vehicle policies as of January 2022. We analyzed the policies and noted the sections relevant for EVCI siting, which you can see on the map. The map has icons related to aspects of EVCI such as tax benefits, power supply, regulations, etc. Some states that had EV policies but did not have any of these provisions in their EV policies have not been included in the map. Let's see an example of incentives for EVCI as a part of the state EV policy. In Andhra Pradesh, the government has offered to allot land parcels for EVCI. It will provide a capital subsidy for the initial charging stations. The volume of the subsidy differs by type of charging infrastructure. The state electricity utility will provide concessional power tariff for EV charging connections and time of day metering will apply. Hence, the EVCI operator will pay less for charging during off-peak hours. Utilities will supply power to charging and battery swapping stations within 48 hours of application, and municipalities will issue provisional permissions immediately. EVCI operators are encouraged to use renewable energy by setting up their own systems or purchasing renewable energy from third-party providers. The state will also reimburse EVCI operators for 100% of the GST paid on charging equipment. While most states have set expectations of the share of the fleet that is expected to convert from internal combustion engine or ICE to electric, only a few have set targets for how many public charging stations they will set up in the next few years. Now, let's look at the main stakeholders in public charging infrastructure. Apart from state governments that have set up EVCI policies, there are CI manufacturers such as Delta Electronics, Fortum, and others. Some of these companies not only manufacture the CI but also act as charging point operators or CPOs. There are also companies that act exclusively as CPOs. A number of charging apps are now available for download in India on Android and Apple. The oil marketing companies BPCL, HPCL, and Indian Oil have begun setting up EVCI at their petrol pumps. Electricity utilities not only supply power to EVCI but also are setting up their own CI for retail or business consumers. Fleet operators of buses, taxis, and freight vehicles are expected to set up their own charging network. EV manufacturers such as two-wheeler manufacturers Ola and Ather are setting up EVCI for their own vehicles, which may be proprietary or available to all vehicles. Looking at the business model of setting up EVCI in India, the Ministry of Power has announced that it is a delicensed activity which can be undertaken by any individual or firm that complies with technical standards. Public charging infrastructure in India has been set up by PSUs and private entities, typically through winning a government bid for a specific location. The charging point may be managed by the same entity or a third party. The rate at which electricity is supplied to the CPO is set by the state's Electricity Regulatory Commission. The rate charged by the CPO to consumers varies depending on factors such as tariff, expected demand, government subsidy, and membership model. Other potential sources of revenue include advertising, sale through vending machines or kiosks, and value-added services for vehicles such as cleaning. We now have snapshots of EVCI set up by different organizations in India. First, EESL, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, a joint venture of PSUs under the Ministry of Power, has set up public charging infrastructure in Delhi through a tie-up with the New Delhi Municipal Council. In 2021, they installed 57 chargers in North Delhi. While NDMC provides the land, EESL owns and operates the CI and shares revenue with NDMC. Since EESL is setting up CI across India, they are able to access low-cost finance and bulk procurement, bringing down their costs. Tata Power has partnered with MG Motors, Railways, City Bus Services, Tata Group companies, and others to set up charging infrastructure across the country. In most cases, the land is owned by the customer while Tata Power owns and operates the CI. The company receives revenue from charging, charger management software subscription, and maintenance costs. While it has easily set up CI at its existing customer's location due to easy access to the distribution transformer network, Tata Power has also set up CI in states where it does not operate as a distribution utility. Indian Oil, along with other oil marketing companies, has partnered with different OEMs and has explored battery swapping options in addition to battery charging. Currently, its charging stations are in outlets that are owned and operated by IOC. However, it plans to have dealer-owned outlets also setting up EVCI in the near future. Ather, an electric scooter manufacturer, has set up Ather Grid in 18 cities. Ather Grid is a proprietary fast charging network for Ather's own two-wheelers as well as for other electric scooters. The company has tied up with parking apps, four-wheeler charger apps, as well as venues such as movie theaters, gyms, and coffee shops. Currently widespread in Chennai and Bangalore, it plans to have a 4x4 kilometer grid across major cities in India. Ather has linked its charging infrastructure to discounts and benefits for Ather scooter owners. For example, fast charging is currently being provided for free. Moving from India to the world, what has been the trajectory of setting up EVCI in top performing countries such as US, China, and Norway? What are the features of their charging infrastructure, their business models? What constraints have they faced? Let's find out. The map shows the number of public EV chargers around the world. Governments and private companies have been constructing public charging infrastructure to match the demand for electric vehicles. China has the highest number of chargers and Netherlands the highest ratio of chargers per million population. The table shows some of the top performers in EVCI deployment, investment, and forms of government support. A preliminary analysis indicates that some countries have focused on private charges for residential use, such as USA, while others have primarily invested in public charging points, such as China. Let's now look at a few of these countries in more detail. The US EVCI infrastructure is mainly in the private sphere, with over 1.5 million private chargers installed at residences. The country has set a target of 3.3 million EVs, battery, hybrid, or fuel cell, by 2025. And in 10 states, all passenger vehicles are to be zero emission by 2050. Some of the key policies promoting EVCI in the US include funding to support public and private charging and identifying locations for charging stations. Cooperatives in some states have formed a regional charging network, and collaboration between electricity utilities and support through government incentive schemes has led to investment in EVCI. Some of the incentives provided include grants for setting up public charging stations and rebates for EV purchase from state agencies or electricity utilities. As mentioned earlier, since most of the charging infrastructure is in the private sphere, there is still a need for enhancing public charging infrastructure. China has an almost equal mix of residential and public charging stations. The country reportedly has the largest number of charging stations in the world, and by 2030, EVs are expected to make up 40% of all vehicle sales. The Chinese central government has promoted EVCI through national policy, setting targets, providing funding, and mandating standards, with provincial and local government level implementing these targets. Financing mechanisms include public spending on EVCI, providing a tariff subsidy for EV charging in a province, and providing financial rewards to local governments that meet EVCI targets. Surveys have shown, however, that there is still an unmet need for installing EVCI at apartment complexes in cities, and the utilization rate of public EVCI is currently low, indicating that siting may be suboptimal or pricing may be too high. Almost 30% of chargers in Japan are rapid chargers. Rapid charging in a country with high population density and shorter travel distances makes EVCI siting easier to achieve. Since 2013, Japan's government has funded charging stations on highways and rest stops around cities. The country has set up a nationwide network of charging stations called Nippon Charge Service. The Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI, has targeted 14 sectors that should be carbon neutral by 2050, and EVs and EVCI are a part of this target. The country has spent almost $1 billion on charging infrastructure. Up to 2/3 of CI is subsidized by the government. And in Tokyo, the Environmental Public Service Corporation set up a subsidy program to accelerate the installation of EVCI at apartment buildings. However, the country faces a slow rate of adoption of EVs and a slow expansion of the total public charging network. Similar to Japan, the Netherlands is also densely populated and has small traveling distances, which helps in optimal EVCI siting. As mentioned earlier, the country has one of the highest rates of EVCI per million population. The Netherlands Action Plan for Electric Driving was launched in 2009. Under its national climate policy, all new passenger vehicles should be zero emission by 2030. And under the National Charging Infrastructure Agenda, the country plans to install 1 million chargers by 2030. The financial incentives provided are mainly in the form of subsidies for purchase of EVs. A sharp increase in the number of EVs has led to an urgent need for improving the national network of charging infrastructure. There's a potential increase in peak demand too, caused by charging EVs, especially from fast charging. Norway is one of the world's leading EV adopters, as EVs already account for 2/3 of Norway's cars. As soon as 2025, all of Norway's new cars are expected to be zero or low emission. The incentives for electric vehicles are both tax-related and behavior-related or structural. The government provides tax incentives including no import taxes, VAT exemption, low road tax, etc. Additionally, the country has invested directly in setting up charging infrastructure. It should be noted though that the cold temperature, the impact on battery range and life, and setting up infrastructure for long distance travel are the main challenges for Norway's EVCI plan. Here's a snapshot of experience of Southeast Asian countries in installing charging infrastructure. We can see that most of the region's countries provide incentives and targets for EVs. However, they have not instituted a policy or rules on EVCI, and most have not set up an extensive network of charging stations. We've seen the experience of other countries in setting up policies, investing, and scaling up EVCI. What should India learn from the international experience? Here are some of the key takeaways. India's focus has been on manufacturing and deploying EVs. It now needs to focus on setting up EVCI. More states and the center should set phase-wise EVCI targets by category, region, vehicle type, etc., and also identify investment and business models, as this has been the practice across the world. Should EVCI be publicly or privately owned, or in the form of a public-private partnership? Should revenue primarily be from electricity sales? Should the EVCI be supported by OEMs, that is the vehicle manufacturers, or should charging be agnostic of OEMs? EVCI needs patient upfront capital, typically provided or backed by the government. It's also important to create multiple sources of revenue. Models for revenue opportunities would differ from public and private sector expectations of return on investment. One of the key reasons for shifting from ICE to EVs is to ensure the country's decarbonization targets are met. Some means to achieve it include increasing the use of renewable energy in charging, battery storage, and vehicle-to-grid technologies. In the US, for instance, the northeastern states use EVs as an opportunity to absorb renewable energy and provide grid support. India can offset the costs against avoided cost of importing oil and health benefits of reducing air pollution. Collaboration between OEMs, utilities, and government on apps citing EVCI can boost revenue, improve geographical coverage, and eliminate unproductive investment. For example, state transport depots with charging facilities used by public bus fleets can share their dedicated CI with private bus fleet companies, creating additional revenue opportunities and improving charging utilization. Also, freight and passenger EVs can use the same facilities for charging requirements after accounting for different EVCI standards. Electricity utilities have been instrumental in many countries in developing EVCI for consumers or other retail users. The source of funds can be a government subsidy or an add-on to the tariff, that is, the investment can be by taxpayers or ratepayers. This can be an additional revenue opportunity for the utility. For example, in the US, the California Public Utilities Commission pays utilities to provide rebates to consumers that purchase EVs. And Green Mountain Power in Vermont, USA provides low-interest, flexible financing for businesses and municipalities to install charging infrastructure. EVCI in India needs to be targeted based on the specific needs of India's fleet. For example, India has a large share of 2 and 3-wheelers. Charging strategies for buses, freight, fleet vehicles, passenger vehicles, and 2 and 3-wheelers needs to be considered. Most states in India have focused on EVCI for 2 and 4-wheelers, but there should be an equal emphasis on freight and logistics EVs in order to achieve quicker electrification of transport. To end this session, let's look at a public charging station set up by CESL in partnership with the Goa government. This charging station is in the central business district of Pato Panjim, where there is ample parking space. It allows for 2 cars to charge at a time using DC1, DC2 or AC1 chargers. The user can schedule charging and pay via a mobile app. The methodology for selecting the location for the charging station is going to be covered in the following module. This concludes our module on Introduction to EVCI. Please email us if you have any questions or comments. Thank you.